Chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita is as important as mind control in life. Unless and until we control our mind, we cannot achieve anything significant. In this sixth chapter, Krishna explains the process of Ashtanga Yoga or meditation as a means to control one's mind. The process of yoga and the basic transcendental knowledge to act in spiritual consciousness is the lesson we have learned so far. Look at your uncontrolled mind as your enemy. Do not come under the sway of your uncontrolled mind. Duty without attachment to the results, duty without any selfish end, duty as a kind of dedication to O Lord Almighty. This is what we learn. There are in all 47 shloks. Now, shlok-wise division of chapter 6 is as follows. Shlok 1 to 4 of this chapter, named Yoga of Self-Control, talks about Karam Yoga. Karam Yoga, that is action, performance of your duty without attachment. Shlok 5 to 10, urging one to uplift self. That's important. Marks of God realized men are explained. Shlok 11 to 32, detailed description of Dhyanyoga. Lord Krishna explains Dhyanyoga in detail to Arjun so that he does not have any confusion. Shlok 33 to 36, the question of mind control is discussed. And Shlok 37 to 47, the fate of one who falls short of achieving the goal of yoga and the glory of Dhyan Yoga is described. Now I'll read shlok-wise English translation of this chapter. Shlok 1. Lord Almighty said, the person who without relying on the fruit of his labor carries out his duty should be considered a yogi, and he should be called a sannyasi. Just by relinquishing one's duty, one does not become a yogi or a sannyasi. Arjun, what is known as sannyas, you can also consider as yoga, because anyone who cannot get rid of sankalps, resolutions, cannot become a yogi. The person who wants to practice and become a yogi should carry out his duty without attachment to the results, and for a yogi, his ability to give up the habit of making futile resolutions. When a person neither gets attached to his deeds nor worldly pleasures of the senses, when he breeds no desire, he is known as yoga rud. It is desirable that a human being always strive to achieve salvation. He should never indulge and get into decadence. Man is in fact his own enemy. Likewise, he can also be his own friend. The human being who has conquered the body, including the senses and the mind, is his own friend. But the person who has not conquered the body, senses and mind is his own enemy. In pleasure and in pain, in summer or in winter, in respect or disrespect, the person whose mind bears no agitation, no attachment, is a person whose Atma, soul, has attained self-realized freedom, and his mind is always creatively engaged in the Almighty. His wisdom teaches him that nothing is really important except the Almighty and His existence everywhere. The person whose spirit is replaced with wisdom and wisdom of science, whose intentions are beyond blemishes, who has thoroughly conquered his senses and for whom dust, stone, and gold are all alike. It is said that such a yogi is complete, or in other words, he has realized God. He is the greatest among human beings. He is unselfish and interested in the good of everyone. He does not distinguish between friend and foe. He treats alike the virtuous and the sinners. The person who keeps complete control over his body, including his senses and mind, he who does not live in vain hopes and is free from greed, is a yogi. He should often seek solitary place and meditate continuously with his devoted mind about the marvels of the Almighty. He should select a sacred place and spread it kusha asan, deer skin, and fabrics. The place should neither be very high nor very low. It should be stable. He should sit straight and control completely the actions of his senses. Keeping his mind stable, he should practice yoga to achieve the purity of mind. With a straight posture, he should keep his upper body, neck and head relaxed and motionless, and fix his gaze on the front tip of the nose without looking into any other direction. Observing brahmacharya, free from fear, the yogi with a mind full of peace that is alert should meditate on my manifestations. The yogi with a fully controlled mind, constantly making efforts with his soul to be fully absorbed in my manifestations, achieve the rare peace which resides only in me, the Almighty. Arjun, this yoga cannot be realized by anyone who eats too much or too little, nor by one who sleeps excessively or by one who does not sleep at all. The yoga which eradicates unhappiness altogether can be achieved only by someone who eats what is necessary and sleeps and keeps awake only when required, as required by the body. He carries out such actions as his duty demands. When the mind, which is in complete control, stabilizes in meditation of the Almighty, when there remains no animal desire to enjoy worldly pleasures, it is said that this is the status of the person who becomes a yogi and is unaffected by all worldly affairs. Just as in a place where there is an oil lamp that does not flicker, the same simile applies to a yogi engaged in meditation about the Almighty. Purified by the practice of yoga and having achieved the state where the mind becomes stable in Lord's manifestations, the practitioner perceives the presence of Almighty and remains satisfied in his devotion. Beyond the bounds of the senses, realized only by potent intelligence, unended joy becomes a part of the yogi who makes up his mind stable and in the attributes of the Almighty. When attaining the divine advantage of realizing God, one considers that there can be no greater blessing. One achieves a state when deep sorrow or anguish cannot disturb at all. That which is unattached with the sorrowful world and that which is known as yoga needs to be experienced. It is one's divine duty to practice such yoga with enthusiasm, patience, and decisive interest. When the desires originating from one's vows are given up, and sense and sensual objects are fully controlled, when one is gradually starting to stabilize his mind with patient wisdom in the thoughts of the Almighty, during this time he should not brood over anything else. The unstable and the restless mind wanders among various worldly objects, and the practitioner must shift his mind away from these objects repeatedly and should try to stabilize it in the manifestations of the Almighty. The person whose mind has become peaceful in all respects and whose Rajogun mode of passion of material nature has quietened by making efforts to achieve oneness with the Almighty, this yogi accomplishes genuine, exquisite joy. The virtuous yogi, engaging his mind in the prominence of Almighty and His presence all over, continuously experiences the joy of realizing Almighty. The person through yoga maintains equanimity, is able to experience the presence of Almighty in all things. He is also able to see all beings in Lord Almighty. The person who finds me, the Almighty, in all living beings, and who is able to see all living beings in my all-pervading form, becomes the person for whom I am never invisible. He is able to see me at all times. The person who gets into constant mode of worshipping the omnipresent in me, Vasudeva, is a yogi who, while performing all his various deeds, in fact dedicates all his performance to me. The person whose attitude towards all beings is constant and same as towards his own personal self, and he who finds no distinction between happiness and sorrow, is the yogi who is considered best among yogis. Arjun said, Madhusudan, the yoga which you have defined as maintaining the steady attitude of mind amidst diverse situations, according to me, due to fickle nature of the mind, is very difficult to achieve. Because Krishna, this mind is extremely capricious and vacillating. It is equally strong and obstinate. Therefore, I consider controlling the mind is as difficult as stopping the wind. Lord Almighty said, Mahabhav, there is no doubt that mind is extremely fickle and difficult to control. But with continuous practice of unattached and constant efforts, it can come under control. For the person who is unable to control his mind, yoga is unachievable. But the person who has controlled his mind can attain yoga easily with constant efforts and practice. This is my considered opinion. Arjun said, Shri Krishna, what happens to the person who has devotion towards yoga but is not disciplined enough to make his mind, and his mind drifts away from yoga, and who is not in a position to achieve the state of self-realization what is his state. Mahabhava, such a seeker who is lost from the divine path of the Almighty, what happens to him? Defeated from both sides, does he end up in disaster? Shri Krishna, you are the only one who is capable of completely clarifying this doubt of mine. It is not possible to find another who can explain this difficult subject clearly. The Lord Almighty said, Parth, such a person is neither ruined in this world nor after his death. Because, dear Arjun, the person who follows the path of salvation of the soul, of realizing the Almighty, is never degraded. The unfulfilled person reaches the abode of the noble and virtuous, and after residing there for many long years, is born again in the families of respectable people who follow the path of purity. In other words, instead of taking birth in the average family, he is born to a family of enlightened and wise. Indeed, such a birth is rare achievement for an average human being. Gathering there the sanskars of the great wisdom, he achieves yoga of constant attitude without much effort. Enthused with the effect of this yoga, he makes even greater efforts to attain realization of the Almighty than ever before. The yoga brushed person is propelled by the previous practices and is undoubtedly attracted towards the Almighty. Such a seeker of yoga of constant attitude transcends the ill effects of sakam deeds, selfish deeds, or the deeds done with personal end in view. The yogi who is a practitioner and is making best efforts with the force and power of the previous births becomes free from sins during the current birth and soon achieves salvation. A yogi is superior to a tapasvi and is also superior to the wise persons who have knowledge of the Shastras, and is undoubtedly better than those who perform deeds with selfish ends in mind. Therefore, Arjun, you must become a yogi. Among all yogis, the one who worships me constantly with devotion is dear to me. This is how Lord Krishna explains this yoga to Arjun to dispel all his doubts.